which a king invited guests to a marriage, and the guests refused to come. And so not only did the guests refuse to come, but they went out and harmed those that were representatives of the king that he sent out to invite them to the wedding. The king had prepared his guest list. He had made sure that there was enough food for everybody to eat. And then he sent his folk out to invite them to the marriage feast. And not only did they refuse to go, but they harmed those that the king sent out, the messengers of the king, that he sent out to invite them to the wedding. So the king turned around and he whooped all of them. But then what he did was he found strangers in the village. He found strangers in the realm and invited them. Not only did he invite them, but he provided clothes for them to wear. So they decided to come. And there was one guest that came up without his royal clothing on that the king gave. The king gave them royal clothes. Why would you? Somebody, that's the thing, folks always say, I ain't got nothing to wear. I can't come because I ain't got nothing to wear. But they didn't have any excuse this time because the king gave them something to wear. And one showed up that didn't have his stuff on. The king said, why don't you have on your clothes that I gave you to wear? And the young man didn't say anything. So the king sentenced him to death. Now, the message of the story is, if the king provides you with an invitation to come, the means to come, gives you something to wear, it is an insult to the king for you to not show up. Oh my God. But see, Jesus had just got done. I'll teach on that another day. Jesus had just got done declaring that parable. And then what happened is there was a conflict that arose. A conflict. Somebody say a conflict. Arose between the Herodians and the Pharisees and Jesus. So what happened was there was a group called the Herodians and the Pharisees. They were trying to entrap Jesus. Imagine that, trying to entrap Jesus. And if you know anything about the text, the Herodians and the Pharisees did not even like each other. Because, let me explain. See, the Herodians were a political party who supported the Roman Empire, and the Pharisees hated the Roman Empire. So, as you can see, the fact that they did not like each other, but since both groups saw Jesus Christ as a threat, they got together and tried to bamboozle Jesus into saying something that would get him into trouble. Both the Pharisees and the Herodians knew that the Jews considered, they hated paying taxes because they understood that giving of money was an act of worship. And since on the money, Caesar's face was inscribed on one side, and on the other side, Caesar was dressed in a robe, in priestly robe, sitting on the throne. And since Caesar demanded worship as if he was a god, if the Jews participated in a system of taxation, which they were forced to do under Roman law, they were under Roman power, they were under Roman authority, and they were forced to do under Roman law, they hated doing it because they considered it idolatry. Okay. And the money they were taxed was a denarius. Denarius was equal 1 day's pay for one Roman soldier. Every person had to pay this. Every single person in the Roman Empire had to pay this every year. Okay. The denarius had the emperor's face on one side and him with priestly robes on the other side. And in verse 17, if Jesus was bamboozled into answering the question in verse 17 with the word no. Let's look at verse 17. Tell us therefore, what thinkest thou? Is it lawful to give tribute to Caesar or not? If Jesus would have answered no to that question, Jesus would have been guilty of treason against the Roman government. But if Jesus would have answered yes to this question, the Pharisees would have accused Jesus of being disloyal to the Jews. Okay, so Jesus was in a dilemma. Jesus was in between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, buddy.
So Jesus, but let me tell you something. Jesus read the folk like an old jet magazine. He understood and discerned their evil intentions, how they were trying to entrap him into saying something that would be his certain doom. So Jesus answered their question by asking a question.
All right.
He said, in verse 20, he said, whose is whose is this image and superscription? Since it bore the mark of Caesar, Jesus